Hello, I would like to go over some of the concepts and definitions that you will be using in exercise 33. And we're going to start off talking about plate tectonics. And so this is a cross-section of what the Earth would look like if we took a wedge out of it. The main parts that you can see here are the upper mantle, the lower mantle, the fluid core, and then the solid core. So the upper mantle is just beneath the crust. It extends down to about 200 to 250 miles, and it ranges in temperature from about 900 to 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the lower mantle is about 1,800 miles thick. And that means that it makes up the bulk of the mass of the Earth, and it gets hotter at greater depths. So the lower mantle near the core can be as hot as 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's this pressure and heat that combine with other tectonic forces to give us volcanoes and also contribute to earthquakes. Beneath that, we have the fluid core, and this is a fluid layer. It's approximately 1,400 miles thick, and it's comprised of mostly iron and nickel. Then the solid core is the innermost part of the Earth. And man has never been to the inner solid core, despite some movies that show differently. But we know from seismological studies and other types of geological assessments that it has a radius of about 760 miles. It's composed of an iron nickel alloy with some other light elements, and the temperature is approximately 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you look up here, you can see the relative thickness of these layers shown in these blue boxes, and then again, this would just be a cross-section of the Earth removed, and then this is what it would hypothetically look like. So lithospheric plates are parts of the Earth's crust and upper mantle that are put into fractured plates like puzzle pieces, and they move across a deeper plasticine mantle. In this case, plastic doesn't mean like the plastic in your water bottle or a fork from a fast food restaurant. Plasticine means that it's malleable and movable as opposed to something that would be described as rigid. And Earth's crust is fractured into 13 major and approximately 20 total lithospheric plates. Each one is composed of a layer of oceanic crust or continental crust on top of an outer layer of the mantle. The combination of crust and the upper region of mantle make up a lithospheric plate, and it's generally considered to be about 60 miles or 100 kilometers thick. So understanding the dynamics of plate tectonics and that it's driven by a deeper thermal process, and there's also stress and elastic strain on the lithospheric materials. So elastic strain, think about what happens when you pull a rubber band apart. And that is the same thing that happens in these plates. It's over a much larger scale, obviously, but there is that kind of strain that happens, and it results in fractures of rock in the lithosphere, cause a release of energy, and this is in the form of seismic waves. And those seismic waves are what we define and measure as earthquakes. Here are boundaries of the plates that are shown on a global scale, and you can see that the names of the plates are also listed. Now, different resources will divide this up maybe slightly differently. Don't worry about that. The main features of the plates are pretty much agreed upon in science, and so we have the North American plate, Caribbean plate, the large yellow Pacific plate, and you can see the names of the others. And so this map, remember, would be a representation of the globe. Imagine splitting it in half and opening it up. So this right part of the map would actually carry on and connect over here to this left part of the map. And there are also minor plates. Again, depending upon what source you look at, sometimes you'll see 18 plates, sometimes you'll see 20. You're going to be looking at a hypothetical map and comparing oceanic versus continental crust. And so let's talk a little bit about that. They're the two main types of crust, either oceanic or continental. Oceanic is found under the oceans, and continental is found under land. And the plates are usually a combination of oceanic and crust. There's some key differences. Oceanic crust is approximately 3 to 6 miles thick, and it's composed of basalt, diabase, and gabbro. The age of the oldest oceanic crust today is only about 200 million years old, and geologists will date the crust using carbon dating, and samples are taken from that crust and analyzed in a lab, and it's very possible to determine with a high degree of accuracy how old crust is. Continental crust, on the other hand, is 20 to 30 miles thick, and it is composed of slightly less dense rocks than those of oceanic crust. The present average age of Earth's continental crust is estimated to be about 2 billion years old. So the crust that we experience and see on landforms is much older than oceanic crust. And in fact, at the divergent spreading ridges or divergent plate boundaries in the oceans is where new crust is formed and appears on Earth's surface. So the location where any two lithospheric plates meet is called a plate boundary. They're commonly associated with geological events like earthquakes, and the landforms that we see as topographic features are mountains, volcanoes, mid-ocean ridges, and oceanic trenches. The majority of the world's active volcanoes occur along plate boundaries, and the Pacific Plate's ring of fire, shown here on this map, is known as the most active place in the world for volcanoes and also for earthquakes. It doesn't mean that that's the only place in the world that they occur, but if you look at this map here and all of the red dots that are lining the ring of fire, and then here in the Hawaiian Islands that most Americans are familiar with, there is a very, very concentrated representation of this active volcano activity. So there are three main types of plate boundaries: divergent, convergent, and transform. At divergent boundaries, the lithospheric plates are moving apart from each other, and that's where new crust is created. It's coming from deep within the Earth. At convergent boundaries, the lithospheric plates will come together in collision zones, and when that happens, crust is either destroyed by subduction, where one plate is going to go down underneath the other, or it's uplifted to form mountain chains. And so you'll see really great animations of this in the ESRI story map. And think about the third type of movement is at a transform boundary, and this is where you have lateral movement and the plates are sliding past each other. There are shearing forces between the lithospheric plates. And then finally, at divergent boundaries, there's tensional force that dominates the interaction between the plates. And then at subduction sites, there's compression of the lithospheric plate material. Here's some images that depict these concepts. And so with the convergent boundary, we have the forces are coming together, and you can see here that the oceanic crust is subducting underneath the continental crust. And this area right here is where the crust is reaching the part of the inner earth where it is extremely hot and it's melting the rock. That's where we get magma, and we see this pressure and the resultant chambers, and the force and the pressure contributes to volcanic activity. So the direction and type of force is inwards, so converge means to come together, and it's a compressing force. As a result, one side can be piled up into a mountain range or a volcano, and the other is usually subducted, and this is where we have our oceanic trenches. In the middle example, with a divergent boundary, we have the forces moving away from each other on opposite sides. And so the force is going outwards, so diverge means to go away from, and this is a tensional force. As a result, magma can reach the surface and result in seafloor ridge spreading, earthquakes, and tsunamis. Underwater earthquakes are called seamounts. And this is a very active tectonic region. The mid-ocean ridge areas of our oceans are where there are a lot of volcanic activity, a lot of earthquake activity, and many tsunamis originate in these locations. Finally, the third type is transform boundary. You can see that there is a sliding of the plates one past each other, and as you can imagine, with very large, massive plates and crust, there is a lot of force. It's lateral. It's also horizontal, vertical, and at an angle. These are very tectonically active areas of the world, and it's a shearing force. So think about if one big, large object scrapes past another, think of the tremendous amount of pressure and force that's going to be created by that. And the result is a graben or a horst, and we get strike-slip faults and a great deal of earthquakes. You will learn more about fault zones and the San Andreas Fault in a future lab. So for this lab, make sure that you do understand these three main types of boundaries. So knowing about the plates and looking at satellite images now in our current time, we can also compare that with geological evidence of the mineral types and the rock types from different continents. Alfred Wegener in 1910 didn't have the use of satellite images, but he looked at the shape of the continents and thought South America would fit exactly against the west coast of Africa, as if they had once been joined. So at that time, there was not geological comparisons of the rock types, and this was the beginning of the theory that all of the plates used to be connected together in a supercontinent called Pangaea. So this was approximately 225 million years ago, and over millions of years, the convection currents started moving the continents apart. Don't worry too much about the specifics of the names. We don't go into a lot of detail in lab. This is more of lecture detail. Just be aware that there was a supercontinent called Pangaea, and there were many morphs and shapes before it got to what we now see as the continents on our globe. So, tectonic plates are being moved by convection forces found within the mantle of Earth, and this is a list of how convection currents work. The magma near the outer core is heated, and here it is in the diagram. As the magma warms, it expands and becomes less dense. The less dense magma then starts to rise towards the crust, and you can see this rising up in the shape of a reverse funnel here in the diagram. The cooling magma becomes dense and it begins to sink. The rising and falling magma creates circular currents within the mantle, and it is these currents that cause friction within the crust and that generate and also perpetuate the movement. And you will see some really great animations in the ESRI story map of that. So again, there was other evidence that supported this idea of a supercontinent and the plates and what we see as land masses that are not connected in current times as having once been connected. And there have been comparisons of plant and animal fossils on different continents, and it was found that fossils of some freshwater reptiles and some other land reptiles, and some plants in the fern family were found on very disparate or far away continents. And so the theory was that at one time these land masses were connected because biologists determined that there was no way that these animals could have crossed the large ocean basins that we see in our current global status. And another major piece of evidence for the theory of continental drift is the glacial sediments that are found in the different areas like South America, Africa, Madagascar, which is an island off of Africa shown here, and Arabia, India, Antarctica, and Australia. So it's this pattern of distribution that scientists agree was only possible if these land masses were at one time connected. So here are some key questions, and these are things that could appear on your quizzes or your final exam for this course. And I'm not going to give you the answers. These are more thinking questions, and they are here for your study review. You can find these PowerPoint slides on Canvas, and I would suggest using those as review in addition to your lab book. Okay, just a little bit of guidance for you on, it's page 229 in your lab book. So I want you to make sure that you read the introduction and use the key that goes with this hypothetical map of a tectonic configuration in an ocean basin. And in order to understand it and interpret it, you really need to read through page 227 and 228 very thoroughly. And it explains to you what the symbols mean, and it tells you how to interpret this map. So a couple of key things: when you see S, I, and D, these are symbols that indicate the depth of earthquakes. S is for a shallow earthquake, I is an intermediate, and then the letter D represents a deep earthquake. When you see this pattern, it's letting you know that the earthquakes occur at different depths in a very close proximity to each other, and this is indicative of plate boundaries that are coming together. And so if you think about that process of subduction where one plate is sliding down beneath the other, and think about this when you look at your ESRI story map as well, that the earthquakes start near the surface, they're shallow, and they get progressively deeper as that large plate is subducting or pushing down. And that's why we see that pattern there. The active volcanoes are shown as triangles. You can see them in this part of the map, here in the middle, and here in this part of the map as well. And so think about the active volcanoes and what those patterns will mean. There are several different types of either oceanic or continental crust that are shown in this ocean basin, and I want you to figure that out. Look at the information in your lab book. It will give you a guide, and the main distinction here is that some of the crust has this stippled effect and some of it is relatively blank or bare. The other clues that you're going to look at are the age of volcanic ocean floor rocks, and those are indicated by numbers with circles around them. And these are not in years, they're in millions of years. And so those are clues for you about what could be going on and what types of boundaries you're seeing. So I want you to be able to distinguish between continental and oceanic crust, be able to know what kind of boundary is there based on seafloor age, the distribution of volcanoes, and the relative depth of the earthquakes. The other thing that I wanted to tell you about this map, there are questions on the back page of the map that go with the map, and there is a little bit of a tricky question at the bottom, and it asks you to draw a cross-section of the lower left-hand corner to the upper right-hand corner, so from A to B. And they want you to try and draw what it would look like if you were to go down to eye level and be drawing a cross-section. I want you to think about this for a bit, and I am going to post a drawing. I'll sketch a drawing for you of what that's going to look like, but I want you to think about it and try it on your own. I realize that it actually is a very complicated way to think about things, and it's a skill set that most of us aren't familiar with. So I don't want to just give you the answer and show it to you. Think about it, try it, knowing that you're not going to be graded on it for trying, and then after you've given it some thought, come back and look at the drawing that I will post with explanation of what the cross-section means. Okay, that's it. I hope that you enjoy the lab, and thank you.